Welcome to the Book Flood Podcast, brought to you by goldenlibraries.com. I am your host, Tom Nixon. My guest this week is Cuban-American award-winning author Margarita Engle. Margarita is the author of a variety of books including Enchanted Air, Drum Dream Girl, Dancing Hands, and The Surrender Tree, which received a Newbery Honor. She served as the National 2017 to 2019 Young People's Poet Laureate. Margarita has won a variety of awards, including the Pura Belpré, the Golden Kite Award, and the Jane Addams Award, among others. In exciting news, her book Wild Dreamers, which we're going to talk about, just made the National Book Award long list. Welcome, Margarita.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. So why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about your childhood, both in Southern California and Cuba?
Well, I'm not a refugee. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. The way that my parents met is perhaps unusual enough to take a few minutes to just mention it. My father saw pictures of my mother's hometown in National Geographic magazine. And he was an artist in Los Angeles, and she grew up in the town of Trinidad on the south central coast of Cuba. It has beautiful colonial architecture that has often been portrayed in magazines. Photographers love it. And since he was an artist, he wanted to go paint those buildings. He saw them and just it inspired him. So he went to Cuba. It wasn't easy to get to that town at that time. It was quite a project. He met my mother on his first day there at an art school of a colonial palace that is now called the Museo Romantico, the Romantic Museum. Not because my parents met there, but because it's a museum of Romantic era art. But they didn't speak the same language. My father spoke only English and my mother spoke only Spanish. And so as artists, they passed pictures back and forth to get to know each other. And within a couple of weeks, they knew they wanted to get married. And so they eventually moved to my father's hometown. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. But when I was young, we were able to go back and spend summers with my mother's extended family. She had a huge family in Trinidad. And for me, those summers were the lifelong inspiration for continuing to travel to Cuba whenever I can now. In between, there was a long gap caused by the travel restrictions that resulted from the, actually they started during my last summer visit as a child and got very serious after the missile crisis. So there was a gap there for 31 years when I wasn't able to visit relatives in Cuba. Beginning in 1991, I started to go back regularly. And those trips, both the childhood and adult trips, have inspired all of my books.
What a lovely story. How often do you go back now?
Well, right now it's difficult to travel, but before the pandemic, I was going as often as I could.
So let's talk a little bit about your books. Do you publish your books through one publisher, multiple publishers? How does that work?
Most of my picture books for younger children, such as this new one, Eloísa's Musical Window. Eloísa is my mother's name, so this book is about her childhood. And my young adult novels, such as the most recent one that you mentioned, Wild Dreamers. Most of these have been published with the Athenaeum imprint of Simon & Schuster. Some of my books are with Holt at Macmillan, and I've had one with Penguin, and then quite a few with a variety of smaller publishers. But Simon & Schuster is my primary publisher.
And how did that happen? How did you get that first book published?
Well, I wrote adult novels back in the 90s, and my first book was pulled out of what they used to call the slush pile when you sent paper manuscripts in,
Mm.
and they piled up on the editor's desk. So I was very fortunate to have gotten published at that time without an agent. Then, when I switched to children's books beginning in 2006, once again, my first was pulled out of the slush pile. And after that, a few years later, I did start working with an agent. Now, of course, all I do is send an electronic manuscript to my agent and then hold my breath for months while I wait to find out if it's accepted.
And you have what book number are you on? Do you know off the top?
I'm around 40 published children's books now, children's and young adult.
So Wild Dreamers was published, I want to say April 2024. So
Yeah.
it's very new. Tell us a little bit about that book.
Well, Wild Dreamers is a young adult verse novel that I think of as part of a very loosely linked series, beginning with Your Heart, My Sky, and then Wings in the Wild, and now Wild Dreamers. These three verse novels I think of as eco-romance, which is a term I made up to describe a love story that also has environmental activism. My teenage characters care deeply about environmental issues, and all three of these books are tied very closely to my scientific training as a botanist and agronomist. Those are my degrees. So they're rich in STEM material to the point where I believe they could be used in biology classes.
Hmm.
But the reason that they're love stories is, I'm going to cough, sorry. I feel like no matter how difficult things get in life, including environmental difficulties, people still fall in love. And it's still uh, a very inspiring way to show teenagers caring both about each other and about the future. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. So we just heard, is it this week, last week, that Wild Dreamers has National Book Award long list?
Yes, it's only been a few days. I'm still in shock. Good kind of shock.
So what's the next step?
On October 1st, they will announce which of the long list books become finalists. And all of the finalists will go to the award ceremony in New York in November.
Oh, wow.
I believe that all of the long list authors, however, will also be invited to certain events, not the
Hmm.
award ceremony. So either way, it's still a tremendous honor.
Oh, definitely. It started out. I was talking to someone about this morning, and it started with, in your category, it started with like 333 books that were nominated. I want to say,
I've talked to
and
people who,
down to 10 very quickly.
yeah, I've talked to people who've judged the National Book Awards. I've been invited to judge it in the past and haven't been able to because I've had an eligible book of my own. But they say that the year when you judge it, you don't do anything else. Don't plan on writing, that all you'll do is read.
Oh, that's a lot to give up.
It's a lot.
So, did you want to read a little bit from Wild Dreamers?
Sure. Rather than read the very first poem, which is a little bit of a long poem, I'll jump in a few pages to page 14, where the girl, Anna, is a Cuban American teenager who's unhoused in the Silicon Valley area. Most of this book takes place in Half Moon Bay, California, where housing is so expensive that even people with good jobs often can't afford it. So she's been living in a park with her mother. The title of the poem is Moonlit. Euphoric with dance joy, I pass signs that remind me to watch out for rattlesnakes and poison oak, followed by a warning that makes my heart gallop. Mountain lion territory. If you see a puma, try to appear large. Reach high, shake your arms, make noise, back away slowly. Never run. In other words, convince the predator that I'm powerful too, not just a delicious morsel of prey. But before I can even begin to practice appearing large, I hear the most beautiful, eerie, non-human melody, as if moonlight has been transformed into music. And then the next poem is called Cielo the Singing Dog. And here, along with all my scientific writing, I've introduced a bit of Cuban magic realism because the indigenous singing dogs of Cuba are believed to be matchmakers. The girl absorbs my voice, and knows she's not alone in this scented world, always circled by a chorus of musical growth. She is so clearly the boy's scent match, but how will I manage to show her that he's so much more courageous than he seems? Matchmaking is every singing dog's greatest challenge and most satisfying task. Those who call us guardian angels don't realize how hard we work to bring love light into the stubborn realm of short-nosed human possibilities. So the dog will eventually be trained as a conservation dog. The boy and girl get to know each other. They establish a rewilding club at their high school and work to feel hopeful about environmental issues while dealing with many personal situations as well.
You give a definition in the book for rewilding. Why don't you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, well, it comes right at the beginning, and my editor asked me to add that in case people weren't familiar with the term. Rewilding is a conservation practice that restores natural habitats. It includes establishing wildlife crossings and the protection of apex predators. And rather than read that whole thing, wildlife crossings are being built now in California to protect mountain lions from traffic.
Mm.
Excuse me. Traffic is the primary cause of death of urban mountain lions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, the wild mountain lions up in the Sierras and the real wilderness, a lot of them starve. But in the urban areas where they're still very common, they're hit by cars, and wildlife crossings can help to save their lives. But it also helps prevent inbreeding because right now, not just mountain lions, but a lot of wildlife that lives in the urban areas is in genetic islands separated by freeways. They
Oh,
can't find each other. They can't cross those roads to have a
right.
larger breeding population. And you're starting to see mutations as a result of inbreeding. And conservation dogs are being used to help determine the best locations for some of these wildlife crossings to make sure that they know where the populations are. The conservation dogs follow the scent of scat to locate the places where various species are living.
That is so fascinating. So, the second book we're going to talk about today, Eloisa's Musical Window, that just dropped August 27th.
Yes, this book is brand new and it came out in both the English and Spanish editions at the same time, which is wonderful. The Spanish edition of Wild Dreamers has been delayed a little bit and it will come out later.
Mm. Do most of your books come out in English and Spanish?
I've been very fortunate that my editor at Simon and Schuster has made an effort to have simultaneous editions. Yes. And it's really wonderful for many reasons. One of my favorite reasons, and one that was a lifelong dream for me before it started to happen, is that I feel like it's so important for family literacy to have the book available in both languages where parents or grandparents might be able to understand it too at this and read it at the same time as the children who would be reading in English at school, and then it could be in Spanish at the library or at home.
I read it last night. It's a lovely, lovely story. Definitely. One of the things that I liked about it, I can imagine you could use this if you're a music teacher. I liked it in the back of the book. You had pictures of all the instruments with the names and everything.
Thank you.
Um,
I would hope so. And I've had several picture books with musical themes, so I would hope so.
so very nice. So, do you have any books coming out soon, or are you working on something now?
My next young adult verse novel for next year will be published in late 2025 is Island Creatures. And I don't have a cover image yet. I've seen a preview of the cover image, and it's really beautiful. All of these have been, I'm so fortunate that my editor has a wonderful artistic sense and chooses just the right illustrator in every case. This is a Gabi D'Alessandro cover on this one, and John Parra did all the art on Eloísa's musical window.
That's one of the things I noticed was about many of your books. Uh, you clearly have someone who knows the importance of having a good cover.
Yes,
Covers sell books to
very.
librarians and to the public, but also they're just you have beautiful covers on your books.
Thank you. Yes, I give the credit to the artist and to the editor who chooses them. That's one thing that many people don't realize about picture books in particular is that the author does not, in traditional publishing, the author does not choose the illustrator. The editor
Correct.
chooses the illustrator and works with both of us to coordinate everything. So I'm just fortunate that my editor has this amazing ability to choose the right illustrator in every case.
Oh, definitely, definitely. So, what do you do to promote your books? I mean, here you're on Book Flood podcast promoting books, but what else do you do?
Well, I do try to keep, readers informed on social media, but uh, I don't do as many school visits as I used to, and book fairs and so forth that involved a lot of travel. The truth is that right now I'm my mother's Alzheimer's caregiver, and it has
Mm.
limited my travel a lot. So the Eloísa, who's in this book, that is her name, she understands a little bit that the book is about her, but uh, she doesn't understand it completely. But that has limited my travel. I used to do a lot of school visits, and I loved going to the kind of book fair where every child leaves with a signed book.
Mm.
I never enjoyed the book fairs where only the kids who had money left with a signed book.
When
I
I was a librarian at a middle
We're a
school, at
community.
Tehipity Middle School, where you have been long ago, I worked really hard to make that happen because it is a challenge for the boots on the ground, the librarian there, but it's so important, especially in some of our communities. It's so important.
I really appreciate that. And when it's planned ahead, there are usually community organizations that will support the purchase of enough books so that every child can leave with a signed book. That's how the Tucson Book Festival, for instance, is done, and it's huge. but they spend all year raising funds and making plans so that every child is equal on the big day when authors finally come into their classroom.
That is so nice. I'll have to look that up too. Anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I would like to mention that I write all of my children's and young adult books in verse. I love poetry. I've been writing poetry since I was a child. And I think of poetry as musical language. I feel like it's meant to be enjoyed. And if there's just one thing, if there's teachers out there, librarians out there, even parents, one thing I'd like to suggest is that instead of asking the children and teens, what does the poem mean? Please ask them, how did the poem make you feel? That way they won't develop a fear of poetry, because when you say, what does it mean? They think there's a right and wrong answer, and there isn't one meaning, one right and wrong answer. What a poem means changes depending on a person's experience that you bring to it, or
Right.
your mood that day. In fact, what a poem means changes for the poet, depending on our mood that day. So
Oh,
really,
for
I
sure.
think that to give a lifelong enjoyment of poetry, and perhaps they'll even enjoy writing poetry themselves and they won't be afraid of it, is to forget that question that all the college professors asked you when you were in school, what does a poem mean, right or wrong? Don't make it a pass fail thing. Just think of it in terms of music that's meant to be enjoyed, and say, how did it make you feel?
That's wonderful. I want to thank you so much for coming to our podcast today. Uh, for those who would like to purchase some of Margarita's books, the links will be in the show notes. Also, I would greatly appreciate if you could like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, Margarita.
Thank you.